Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. We are supposedly live on some new channels right now. Let me know if you're watching on Telegram or Instagram. I did what I think was needed to be done to get us live there. So I hope it's working. We're also on Rockfin, which still somehow exists. And apparently the Instagram is not happening. Maybe so we're removing Instagram. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, and Telegram seems to be going well. So we'll get that up next week. Yeah, I was just telling Aaron I agreed to debate Rabbi Shmuley. I'm just trying to catch up to Aaron, who called him a Nazi. I don't know if I'll be like collateral damage for that. It's on some channel run by Mario Nafal, who's close to Elon, and I guess it's mainly a Twitter X thing. But yeah, get ready for the clown show. It should go up this weekend or next week. Two Jews, one conjured up by an anti-Semite and the other one accused of being an anti-Semite. Yeah. So yeah, I'm here with Aaron Mate as usual. How's it going?
One of them, a spiritual advisor to many people over the years. Michael Jackson, Cory Booker. I don't think you've ever been someone's spiritual advisor, so that's another difference between you guys.
Yeah, you're my spiritual advisor just because of your proximity to Gabra Mate. But no, I've never advised anyone spiritually. I've never been a personal trainer. I've never even taught journalism, which is a fake thing anyway. And Shmuley was attempting to be Pope Francis's spiritual advisor in his final days. He was hanging out in the Vatican, and it felt like he was trying to put a hex over him or something, because Pope Francis, who just died yesterday or 2 days ago, was on the phone every day with the priest from St. Porphyrius Church in Gaza, checking in on them, and was loathed by Zionists. Their Israeli Telegram channels lighting up with glee at the Pope's death. So I don't know if, like, whatever happened to Michael Jackson, Shmuley was trying to, the reverse mojo, he was trying to put on Pope Francis. Anyway, that's who's debating. That's who's representing Israel now. It's him. There was some discussion about me debating Alan Dershowitz, which I would have liked to. I wanted to be like, why the fuck did you go to that island? Why did you go to that island? I was like planning on saying that, but then he just never materialized. But these are the people representing Israel, and like Michael Rappaport and whoever they can pay. It's not a very strong or very deep. It's not a very strong front line or very deep bench there. They just have bombing and censorship. That's all they got.
And, I'm back on the issue of Pope Francis. I don't know if you saw this, but they deleted their condolence message to Pope Francis where they said, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May his memory be a blessing." And they deleted it after people pointed out that Pope Francis was, as you said, a critic of Israel's mass murder campaign in Gaza. Now, one could argue Pope Francis should have done more to speak out, but he did speak out. And as you said, he was in contact with people in Gaza. He called them every day. And so Israel, after being reminded of all this, they just simply deleted their condolences to the Pope.
Yeah. I hope everyone sees that. Everyone sees the deletion. You can't undelete the deletion. So there it is. I mean, the arrest during the Holy Week in Gaza and in the West Bank and Jerusalem, there were arrests of Orthodox priests on camera. Israel routinely attacks Palm Sunday in Bethlehem. If the procession attempts to get to Jerusalem through the wall they've constructed, Israel would probably tear gas Jesus if he tried to get up in there as well. So I didn't even know that, but that's pretty shocking. It's like the anti-foreign ministry. And they're spending $150 million on paying influencers, paying for trips to Israel for low-level influencers who are basically just admitting they're paid. Looks like Van Jones is on the take. And again, that money, it's going nowhere. That's why they're resorting to censorship, bombing throughout the entire region, and now pushing for war with Iran like they have never pushed before. I've been following this pretty closely, as have you, Aaron, since your days at Democracy Now! There has been a consistent push, consistent lobbying by Israel and its cutouts in Washington at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies for a U.S. strike on Iranian nuclear facilities and more. And it really feels like this is the most intense pressure we have ever witnessed. Obviously, because of October 7th and its aftermath, the wounds that Hezbollah received, the fact that the U.S. is bombing Yemen right now, another ally of Iran, the destruction of the Syrian state, all of these are contributing factors. But I mean, why else do you think this? What else accounts for this intense pressure?
Well, this is the culmination of all those things you were talking about. Back when the Bush administration marked Syria for regime change, they acknowledged that, you know, one of the reasons was that this could help them ultimately carry out regime change in Iran. And they noted that, you know, the reason Syria had to go was because this was after Hezbollah dealt Israel a serious setback in the 2006 war that Israel launched on Lebanon, and Syria played a major role in that. And I think there was a recognition that if they ultimately wanted to get to Iran, they'd first have to take out Hezbollah and Syria. So now that they've achieved that, they're seizing the moment, and they're going after Iran because Iran, through, you know, its own capabilities and its allies, acts as a deterrent to Israeli aggression. So Netanyahu, who's been in power now for 30 years, basically, 1996, I think it was when he first took office. He realizes that this is his moment. He has a very friendly administration in the Trump White House, who listens to people like Mary Matelson, who's also very close to Netanyahu. So they're seizing the moment.
Yeah. I think that's what they expected when Trump was elected. And they expected that Miriam Adelson and other figures like Adam Milstein, who funds the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, would be able to impose their will on Trump and the people around him. And it isn't going as they had hoped. I think one problem for them is that throughout this period, Iran developed a ballistic missile program. And Iran also was able to enrich uranium because Iran looked at what was happening around the world and learned the lesson of the Libya model, as well as what the North Korean model presented, which was that if you have nuclear deterrence, the US president will come politely and offer you some incentives to denuclearize, including sanctions relief. If you do not, you will be sodomized by al-Qaeda mercenaries with NATO air support in your hometown, as Gaddafi was. So that's the lesson here. And Iran has not yet produced a nuclear weapon, but the debate is raging within the White House. It does seem to be influencing some of the intrigues we're witnessing, the palace intrigues, if we can call them that, inside the Pentagon, which are also just like sheer buffoonery. As if we couldn't predict that Pete Hegseth would get up to this kind of behavior. But there was a New York Times report the product of leaks. I assume that they were leaks from within the White House and within the Pentagon. And we talked about it last time, or maybe I discussed it on Judge Napolitano. Basically, this was 6 days ago. This piece comes out. And when I say I assume they come from within the White House and within the Defense Department, I mean, they don't seem to be the product of Israeli foreign surveillance of the Trump administration, although Ronan Bergman's name is on this. Trump waved off Israeli strike after divisions emerged in his administration. Israel developed plans for attacking Iranian nuclear facilities that would have required U.S. assistance, but some administration officials had doubts. It was waved off in recent weeks by Trump in favor of negotiating a deal with Tehran to limit its nuclear program. We see Steve Witkoff and his team have been in Oman, where they have a room separate from the Iranian foreign ministry team, the Iranian negotiating team, and the Sultan of Oman and his team of negotiators are running messages between the two rooms. Trump made his decision after months of internal debate over whether to pursue diplomacy or support Israel in seeking to set back Iran's ability to build a bomb at a time when Iran has been weakened militarily and economically. Kind of a questionable statement. The debate, blah, blah, blah. We moved down into the article, into its body, and we learned that the people that we expected to be opposed to this strike, well, to be in support of it, are Mike Waltz. We knew that. And Michael Kurilla, who's the head of CENTCOM, General Michael Kurilla. Mike Waltz is a neocon in good standing. And it was just a few weeks ago that Tucker Carlson, who has access to the White House and Trump's inner circle, tweeted a warning about war with Iran. So he was obviously seeing the signals blinking red. The plan was, with the second aircraft carrier in the region for Yemen, joining the Harry S. Truman, you have the Carl Vinson, which is in like eastern Yemen, and moving the THAAD Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, a new battery into the region, meaning that 1/3 of all THAAD systems, which are extremely expensive, are currently deployed to protect one tiny little psychotic apartheid state far away, along with a half dozen B-2 bombers carrying 30,000-pound bombs, something Israel does not have in its arsenal, which would be needed to penetrate the deep underground facilities at Fordo and Natanz and elsewhere. Everything was in place for Israel, not for the United States, by the United States. And the New York Times paints Yemen correctly as a test run for Iran. But inside the Trump administration, some officials were becoming skeptical of the Israeli plan. In a meeting this month, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, presented a new intelligence assessment that said the buildup of American weaponry could potentially spark a wider conflict with Iran that the United States did not want. Duh. A range of officials echoed Ms. Gabbard's concerns in the various meetings. Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, which we didn't entirely expect, and J.D. Vance, who is a known opponent of war with Iran, expressed doubts. And then they said even Mike Waltz was skeptical that the Israelis could achieve their plan, which included sending commandos into the country without substantial American assistance. It wasn't going to be a cakewalk. And so that story erupts at the same time that you see Dan Caldwell, who was one of the few so-called restrainers who was working under Pete Hegseth in the Pentagon, who had been targeted ever since he was named in January. I think we talked about it here, just like Danny Davis was, and other restrainers, war skeptics who are veterans who have seen the face of war. And he was frog marched out of the Pentagon. He says, and he claims now, that he doesn't know why exactly he was removed, but some sort of leaks were involved. And after this story appeared, I actually don't have it in front of me, Jewish Insider, which is the main publication in Washington, kind of an Israeli cutout, which was leading the attack on all of these figures. Dan Caldwell, Danny Davis, Tulsi Gabbard, all of them, all directed by the Likudnik lobby in Washington, freaked out and published comments by Israel lobbyists like Michael Makowski declaring that this article itself and this article revealing all of these figures opposing an Iran war shows the Trump administration is out of control. Something needs to be done. They all need to be fired. And everyone who leaked this story needs to be fired because it hurts Israel and puts Israel on the defensive. And that's what was happening. And then meanwhile, Pete Hegseth, who's so obviously in over his head, who had appointed Dan Caldwell because they worked together at Pete Hegseth's little veterans NGO in Washington, his nonprofit. Pete Hegseth doesn't defend his people, doesn't say anything, and appears to be kind of on the ropes himself. And then we learn that Pete Hegseth has a second Signal chat. Pete Hegseth had been texting his brother, his wife, and his lawyer with precise U.S. plans on Signal to deploy F-18s for trigger strikes. This was reported about 48 hours ago on the front page of the New York Times, and now there are calls for Hegseth to be fired. But, Aaron, as we know, Mike Waltz was the staffer at the NSC who started the original Signal chat, which became the source of the Signalgate scandal, and welcomed his old buddy, Jeffrey Goldberg, one of the biggest antagonists of the Trump administration, into the chat. And no one's calling for Mike Waltz's head today. So this has fueled this theory, mostly within MAGA circles, that Hegseth is being targeted by the deep state because of his opposition to Iran. Do you buy that argument? And what are your general thoughts on this developing saga?
I don't buy the argument that Hegseth is being targeted, but because of his opposition to the deep state, especially after he just announces $1 trillion Pentagon budget. And so proud of that Trump is requesting for the first time $1 trillion for the Pentagon. He does strike me as very incompetent. It's just so obvious from his public behavior and his responses to being called out. He's just so defensive, won't take any responsibility, and just basically it's obvious why he's there, because Trump likes him and Trump liked watching him on Fox and Friends. But my only question about this Iran story, where, you know, Hegseth and JD Vance and Tulsi Gabbard are painted as the ones who, you know, waved or helped wave off a Trump from helping Israel bomb Iran. You know, is this also possibly an effort by people in the Trump camp to create leverage with Iran as they're engaging in these talks? So like they leak this story to make it look as if they're about to bomb Iran, and they still might do it. And they're hoping that Iran will agree to concessions that they wouldn't otherwise make because of stories like this, like which portrays the Trump team is coming close to helping Israel bomb Iran. I'm not saying that for sure, but I do think that's one possibility, because you never know with this stuff what the agenda is behind it. It could also be people inside the Trump, you know, people with access to what took place trying to raise the alarm about a potential Trump authorized strike on Iran and trying to prevent that, which is why those Israel lobbyists were so alarmed. But I also think it could go the other way too, which is that this is people cynically trying to basically intimidate Iran as they're engaging in talks, or get Iran to walk away from the talks and just engage in war. I think many motives have to be discussed. There's another Times story also recently about how Israel sabotaged the hostage negotiations, which I thought was really interesting, where basically the Times reported that it was Israel that sabotaged the Trump administration's efforts via its envoy, Adam Bowler, to speak to Hamas. And they were very close to a deal that would have freed Adon Alexander, the Israeli American. But essentially, once Israel got wind of that, they intervened and sabotaged it. And in the Times story, it even says that U.S. officials believe that Netanyahu tried to sabotage their deal, which is exactly what happened. And why would Netanyahu want to sabotage a hostage deal? Well, maybe also because a hostage deal would make it less likely that the U.S. would help him bomb Iran.
Yeah, I mean, and Israel has used the media in the U.S., Jeffrey Goldberg, for example, to create the sense that it was about to bomb and that the U.S. had to assist it. After the New York Times story dropped, Israel floated in the media. It was first picked up by Reuters that it still wanted to carry out a limited strike on Iran. But part of the problem is Israel can't, on its own, even with U.S. help, set back Iran's nuclear program more than a year. So why go that far? Why do it? And, you know, here's someone else who disagrees with the idea that Hegseth is being targeted simply because he has appeared as an opponent of the Iran war, something I never knew before and something we've never heard from him before, because I've always seen him as kind of an ultra-Zionist shill. This is Kurt Mills. Kurt Mills is a friend of Tucker Carlson's and someone who represents kind of the non-interventionist right. He's sort of one of the brains of the non-interventionist right. He's been on Tucker Carlson's show recently. He said the quick and dirty media narrative pits Hegseth as restrainer against Waltz. This isn't accurate. See what Hegseth said on Yemen during Signalgate. The reality is operational. Hegseth is just not up to this. The casualties, many of his friends who were senior aides, who are foreign policy realists, now hawks, and it should be, you know, neocons, Tom Cotton and even Waltz, are embracing Hegseth. A lot going on, but the truth matters. And Tucker Carlson has just interviewed Dan Caldwell. I haven't had a chance to watch the full interview. It's an hour and 20 minutes, but there are some interesting highlights there where Caldwell at least backs up our analysis of the situation, which is not, you know, particularly revelatory, but it's pretty interesting to hear it from someone who is on the inside. This is Dan Caldwell, who was frog marched out of the Pentagon, who was not defended publicly by Pete Hegseth on who he thinks is trying to take the U.S. to war.
Why people want war with Iran. I think when it comes down to it, is a lot of people still think you can do regime change wars successfully in the Middle East.
Regime change wars? I thought this was all about getting rid of the whatever half dozen Iranian nuclear sites because we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
Well, I think Donald Trump has exposed them because they're essentially, I mean, some of the biggest advocates of war with Iran, whether it's groups like Foundation for Defense of Democracy, writers at certain publications, essentially they are saying the problem with diplomacy is it doesn't lead to regime change, is that the policy should be regime change. It's almost like the nuclear issue is really about creating a pathway to regime change. And it really still goes back to this idea is a lot of them deep down inside believe, and some of them say it out loud, that we could have made Iraq successful. And Iraq is just a mess. It is an absolute just cluster. That's why.
So all pretty obvious, but he names the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies as the main culprit here. Foundation for the Defense of Democracies is basically the Foundation for the Defense of Israel. It even said that on its founding documents. Read the work of journalist Eli Clifton on the history of the FDD. On their founding documents, it was listed as a lobbying organization to promote and defend Israel in the United States under a different name. Its president, go ahead.
Well, this is one of the reasons why the Al Jazeera documentary on the Israel lobby, the lobby was censored, right? Because in it, some undercover footage reveals that an Israel lobbyist admits that basically FDD, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, is an Israeli agent group. It's an Israeli, it's a foreign agent. And that's one of the things that got that documentary censored by Al Jazeera under direct U.S. Israeli pressure.
Yeah. The lobby, the U.S. lobby, I mean, the lobby UK came out, but the lobby U.S. is one of the most important documentaries to watch right now. One of the most important, one of the most powerful and subversive undercover documentaries. I consulted on it. I helped conceive it, but then journalist James Kleinfeld took the ball and ran with it, along with Clayton Swisher, who's no longer at Al Jazeera. And what he pulled off was just incredible. It was one of the most incredible investigations, hidden camera investigations ever. And it never saw the light of day because the Qatari emir and the whole Qatari regime was terrified of what would happen if it came out. They were being threatened by the US, by Israel. They were saying they would pull Al Jazeera's broadcast license in the US. There was a letter in Congress. And there was one scene where James Kleinfeld, posing as Tony, he had embedded himself in the Israel Project and actually destroyed a major arm of the Israel lobby in Washington through going undercover there. He goes to a conference of Sheldon Adelson's IAC, and Israeli intelligence official named Sima Vaknin Gil, who's a brigadier general, former brigadier general, declares, that we're using everything we can to bring to bear our power on the government. And we have FDD, she says, and that's the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. So yeah, it's basically an Israeli think tank in Washington. And Mark Dubowitz, the president and CEO, if you look at his messaging in the past several days, he's opposing negotiations between the Trump administration and Iran, not because of the nuclear issue, where Iran has pledged to stop enrichment and allow very invasive and onerous inspections from the IAEA, which Israel is not subject to. He's concerned that it will stop the momentum towards regime change. And that is the real goal here. That's what this is about. They want a regime change war. And to enact regime change in Iran, you're going to have to see a bloodbath in which Americans will die and American allies will die. And that's what Israel wants. So it's like the perfect nightmare scenario. And that's kind of what Dan Caldwell is saying. But we're kind of having to annotate his comments because, we're the gray zone. So.
But yet, meanwhile, Trump has sent Steve Witkoff, his top envoy, to negotiate with Iran. And by all accounts, there has been progress made. Although Witkoff had to walk, when Witkoff basically said that what they were going towards was basically Iran nuclear deal 2.0, he then had to walk that back after under pressure from, the neocon Israel lobby. But those talks still are ongoing. And by all accounts, they have made progress. So it sounds to me like Trump still hasn't made up his mind which way he wants to go. But he's clearly, as we've been discussing, being pulled in the direction of war by people who are extremely influential and who he listens to. And no matter what his own preferences are, we've seen, just in talking about this, we see just how powerful the pro-Israel lobby is in Washington, especially in the Trump White House.
Well, it's not just the pro-Israel lobby. The Mossad director and strategic affairs minister went to Oman to lobby Steve Witkoff, and they felt like they came away empty-handed.
Yeah.
They were kind of upset and fuming in Israeli media through their various stenographers. So the Israeli intelligence is openly applying a full court press here. And what do you think they're doing? They're feeding them documents. This is Iranian site. They will produce a nuclear weapon to destroy us by Tuesday, and all kinds of phony documents. They're known for fabricating documents, whether it's to stop a hostage deal or to get the US to turn up the heat on Iran. But it didn't work. It hasn't worked yet. There's another meeting on Saturday on the subject of Signalgate. One of the major takeaways was that Israeli intelligence was responsible for US targeting in Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. was getting a lot of Israeli intelligence. Also, Pete Hegseth revealed that the U.S. public isn't on board with this war. They don't even know what Yemen is, but that Israeli intelligence was being sent. And it makes sense because the U.S. is bombing civilian targets. They're slaughtering civilians left and right. They bombed a civilian market 24 hours ago inside Yemen. There's no military value there. That's very Israeli of them. But the Israelis were furious that it got exposed through the buffoonery of the Trump administration. And it feels to me like, and specifically Mike Waltz, and it feels to me like Mike Waltz has done something very disturbing to, this is an assault on a bakery in Yemen.
Yeah, the old city of Sana'a, the apartment buildings, grocery stores, bakeries, just like this man's saying here that they hit the bakery while people were buying bread.
Yeah.
They've also bombed, civilian infrastructure like water treatment plants. I mean, and this is now just seen as routine. The Trump administration is bombing Yemen, not only on Israel's behalf, but with Israeli intelligence. And everyone just yawns. Everyone just totally yawns.
I mean, blowing up a civilian port that served 2/3 of Yemen with fuel and food, killing over 100 port workers, no military target. Just it's about causing an energy crisis and doing a kind of a Gazification process. There was no outrage in the U.S. press. I mean, all the outrage has been focused on these leaks. But I think it's important to understand the personnel situation in many ways, because the Israel lobby understands personnel as policy. People they've groomed or people that are sympathetic to them advance the policies they want. So back to Israeli intelligence being exposed, the Israelis communicated that they were furious about this, furious with Mike Waltz and the media. And what has Mike Waltz gone and done? Trump's NSC director, no thanks, for Iran and Israel, previously worked for Israeli Ministry of Defense. This is Ryan Grimm and Sagar and Jetty Scoop. And Mike Waltz is hired as director for Israel and Iran at the NSC, Merav Seren, who is an Israeli, who previously worked at the Israeli Ministry of Defense and where else? FDD, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And now she's inside the building. If only there were a 3-letter acronym to describe this strange phenomenon of Israel just having such a powerful role over U.S. foreign policy. I don't know who's like in the U.S.-Israeli relationship, who's Kanye and who's the 6-year-old cousin, but it's very weird. Maybe less consensual. I don't know. No, that's anyway. I thank Kanye for letting me make an incest joke on the Grayzone. Not funny, disturbing. War is even more disturbing. And with Merav Seren in there, we are careening towards U.S. supporting or enacting attacks on Iran on behalf of Israel, which she represents. Her brother is Omri Seren, veteran Israel lobbyist, hangs out with all the neocons in Washington, got a job as Ted Cruz's foreign policy director. And, we call him Tel Aviv Ted, one of the top recipients of AIPAC money, does whatever Israel wants. And right behind him in his office is an Israeli asset. So that's what we've got now. And I think this has to do with Signalgate, that Mike Waltz was trying to mollify the Israelis here. Of course, he seems to support a strike. Then behind Pete Hegseth, this is getting very little attention, is someone named Steve Feinberg. This is someone who might succeed Pete Hegseth if he is ousted. This is when Steve Feinberg was appointed to his position as deputy director of the Department of Defense. John Hudson Trump offered billionaire investor the job of Deputy Secretary of Defense, awarding the number 2 job to a financier with investments in companies that maintain Pentagon contracts. No word yet if Feinberg accepted. He did accept. And I think that Feinberg was placed there in order to make sure that Hegseth was confirmed to assuage the doubts of senators like Roger Wicker or Lindsey Graham, who wanted to make sure there was a steady hand from the war machine. Well, I don't know if Feinberg is a hardcore Zionist. He's someone who he's a private equity investor, meaning a vulture capitalist. And he'll come in and, do roll-ups where they create monopolies of various companies, where they buy up the companies and then roll them up into one company to create a monopoly, and then, hollow them out for profit, buy up hospitals and hollow them out, create medical groups that provide terrible service, and also buy up defense firms, buy up arms firms. Feinberg's Cerberus Capital was an owner of DynCorp. It also owns a port in the Philippines that is a major shipment point for U.S. arms and military platforms to contain China. So Feinberg is a walking conflict of interest who profits from plunder and war. And he's the figure behind Hegseth no one's heard of him. No one knows who he is. He's not as colorful. You don't see him a lot. He could either rise to the top or play a very influential role here. So it's important to know who the personnel is in this debate. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and just to stress that Dan Caldwell, who we heard from earlier, who was speaking to Tucker Carlson, where does he come from? He came from Defense Priorities, which is in DC, a very rare non-neocon think tank. And it's just incredible that someone like that can only last a few months. They're always the first ones to go, the people who aren't reflexively pro-war. And people like that being ousted, I expect we'll see more of that in the weeks to come, especially as forces that want to see a war with Iran increase their campaign.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and with the Trump administration, you're seeing just the real forces of finance that have controlled U.S. governments since the aftermath of World War II. The masters of plunder just rear their heads in ways they haven't before and just take on government positions instead of trying to influence empty suits from behind the scenes. That's Steve Feinberg. It's a collection of billionaires advancing the financial priorities of their predatory industry through policy. And Pete Hegseth, he's just kind of a colorful front man who Trump, I think, believes is somehow charismatic and is way over his head here, way over his head. There was a great exchange, I believe, in Israel with the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which is one of the fake ministries that Israel has to create because they have to give all of their they have to have so many ministers in order to hold a coalition together. They'll be like, we need the ministry for the Orthodox party. We need ministry for the Mizrahi party, Shas. We need the ministry for the religious nationalist party. We need the ministry for the very fascist religious nationalist party. And we need a ministry for the very, very, very fascist religious nationalist party. So they can all have different ministers. And then this will allow us to make Netanyahu king forever. That's how Netanyahu's people do it. So they made up the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. I think it was so like Avigdor Lieberman could be a minister because they needed the Russian vote. So they have this other fake ministry, which now has a spokeswoman. And they had a press conference, and RT dared to ask about the forbidden issue, which our friend Sam Husseini has been basically blacklisted for in the Trump State Department briefing room: Israel's secret nuclear weapons program, its strategic ambiguity, which exempts it from IAEA inspections at the Dimona facility, where it has at least 250 nuclear warheads, and has not just the Middle East, but Europe in its crosshairs through the Samson option, which Seymour Hersh revealed in the 1970s. So watch this exchange. This is wild.
Iran cannot have nuclear weapon, and this is what's in front of us. We understand it's not just a threat to Israel, but to the entire world.
What about Israel?
Israel is not posing a threat to anyone. We don't have any ambitions.
Sorry, I mean, my whole bit was wrong because this is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but they do have a Ministry of Strategic Affairs and a Ministry of Women's Empowerment and all sorts of things. But this is the real Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I actually couldn't believe this was the spokeswoman, so I apologize.
Iran has ambition in the entire Middle East. They're posing a threat and are controlling and have destroyed Lebanon, controlling Lebanon through Hezbollah, destroying its politics, destroying its social fabric, destroying its economy. They did the same thing in Syria. They do the same thing in Iraq. They do the same thing in Yemen, destroying the population, destroying the country, bringing them on the verge of starvation. And this is what they're attempting to do in Jordan. That's what they're doing in Africa. That's what's happening. Who's arming Al-Shabaab? Who's training Al-Shabaab in Somalia right now? What's happening in Central and South America? Hezbollah is the biggest controller of illegal drug and weapon trafficking routes in Central and South America.
Wait, what?
Trump's war on the cartel is not just about the illegal drugs and weapon and the threat of those gangs, but it's the Iranian threat. And so Iran is a threat to the entire world. And Israel is at the front line of stopping the worst enemy the world can. And I don't understand that question.
With all respect, the question was not about Iran. The question was about
Israel's
Israel.
posing a threat on? Israel has never provoked, has never attacked unprovokedly.
Israel is never attacked unprovokedly is like my favorite quote of the year.
Usually these Israeli spokespeople are like native English speakers because they come from Australia or South Africa.
Yeah.
This lady seems to be a rare exception of someone who's not born actually, in a foreign country. So at least she's from Israel, it looks like. But yeah, that makes for funny lines like that. Israel,
yeah, and she looks like she just got out of the shower or is a big Rick James fan.
But I just love, she has to acknowledge that all of Israel's wars, at least she has to kind of admit tacitly that it's not as if, like the standard Israeli narrative is that Israel's always attacked, but actually she's actually saying that we've attacked, but never unprovokedly. So we've always been provoked whenever we attacked, which of course is another lie. But at least she's kind of acknowledging at least that Israel has attacked every single time, because actually it does start all of its wars.
They didn't attack unprovokedly in 1967 when they were able to wipe out the much of the Egyptian Air Force because no one was ready for their attack. There was no pretext for it at all.
Yeah. And then they managed to steal all this land that they wanted, which somehow it's such a miracle in a defensive war, supposedly, that you end up stealing all this new territory that you've always wanted. What a miracle.
Unprovokedly.
This has always been on the defense of our country and our people. We have no ambition. When you hear the Ayatollah saying every single day about their ambitions, what about the Turkish ambitions? What about what's happening in Syria? Do you ask those leadership about it?
Well, hasn't Israel just stolen Mount Hermon, the highest point in Syria, and moved close to Damascus's suburbs, extending its occupation?
Well, yeah. Israel is.
And Israeli ministers have talked about going to Lebanon too. Sellers have talked about going to Lebanon. So they talk all the time about expanding their ambitions. I mean, they've been talking about that since before 1948. This is their entire history, is just stealing more land.
They have no ambition. They're just like, they're just wasting away in Margaritaville. They're not doing anything.
Well, Israel
this is great.
Is the key for stabilizing the Middle East.
That's almost as good as unprovokedly. Israel is the key for stabilizing the Middle East.
So if Iran abandons
We
Its
are.
nuclear program, Israel will do the
Israel
same?
is what's stabilizing the Middle East. Iran is what's
No answer.
destabilizing, arming, and terrorizing the entire population around. Do you know what we've been through? Not just the Israeli people, the Lebanese people, the Iranian people, the Yemenite people. They
A Yemenite?
on for
Is that their
freedom,
Israeli
for
tribe?
food,
Yeah.
for economical prosperity. And who's preventing that? Iran. This is the greatest enemy the world have during these days. And so this arming Iran is not Israel's interest. It's your interest. It's international community's interest. Try and imagine what is happening right now in the Middle East with with nuclear weapons. It's not just a threat on Israel. It's a threat on the entire world.
Well, that's the Israeli logic, not exactly articulately expressed, but that's the logic. But it's also a way of deflecting from, I think, one of the most important issues that you're not allowed to, it's not even discussed in US media. And I think the US government is unofficially, it feels like they're unofficially banned from even discussing it because of the furor that would erupt, which is Israel's secret nuclear program, which is what is fueling Iran's enrichment program. I mean, it's the reason Iran has to enrich, along with Israeli pressure for an assault, an invasion, a regime change war. And she reminds me of when Donald Trump in the 2016 debate with Hillary was asked about, his boasting to Billy Bush about grabbing women by the genitals. It was like this leaked audio. And he said, we're going to knock the hell out of ISIS. And he just immediately deflected to knocking the hell out of ISIS. And then just the question, it just moved on and blunted the impact of that issue.
And what did Iran recently propose? They've revived again, which is something they put on the table for decades now, which is a nuclear-free Middle East. Let's have a nuclear-free Middle East. Whenever the UN talks about that, Iran supports it. It's only the US and Israel that refuse to even discuss it, when that would be the solution to everyone's problems. If
Yes.
you're so concerned about, nuclear proliferation, then just ban nuclear weapons in the Middle East. But the US and Israel won't do that because that would take away Israel's ability to threaten everybody with their nukes, which they actually have, unlike Iran, which, if you believe US intelligence, still does not have a nuclear weapons program. Contrary to what many would argue would be in their own best interest. As John Mearsheimer argues, the Middle East would be safer if Iran had nuclear weapons.
India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. That has probably reduced the risk of an India-Pakistan war over Kashmir. However, if a war does occur, it increases the risk of mass destruction. But I think if you look at Israel, the mentality of its citizens, embodied by the foreign ministry spokeswoman, who's clearly just off her rocker, very aggressive and warlike, the instability of Israeli politics. I think the greatest threat for a nuclear strike in the world right now emanates from Israel. And of course, there's no inspection. There's no inspection allowed at Dimona. I think every reporter who goes to the State Department who has any spine or brain at all has to do what Sam Husseini does and did. And, if I decide to go back there, I have to do a bunch of paperwork. What I would just say is, does any country in the Middle East currently have nuclear weapons? I remember Helen Thomas used to ask that question. And you'll see that the spokeswoman will not have an answer and refuse to answer. She called Tammy Bruce, she called Sam Husseini a conspiracy theorist for daring to bring up Israeli nuclear weapons. But you're doing it so the American public can see that there's something deeply wrong there. There's a major contradiction in our policy, and that only Israel has been granted this exemption, I guess, because of the Holocaust. And it's the one key to, I think, ending this crisis. If I were campaigning for office, I would campaign for a nuclear-free Middle East. But I'm not going to campaign for office. Somehow it wouldn't the bullet wouldn't just hit my ear.
one thing I want to say is this: is that I know the idea of a Palestinian state is not very popular among leftist circles because it would mean accepting the existence of this apartheid colony that stole their land. But on that issue, Iran has a far more accommodating position than Israel or the U.S. does. Iran has said before that they would accept a Palestinian state, especially if Palestinians approved of it in a popular referendum. So it's only Israel and the U.S. that stand apart and insisting on Israel's right to take over all the Palestinian and a wider regional land that it wants. And it's Iran that supported the compromise that the rest of the world supports. So, and I think, one of the reasons why Israel wants regime change in Iran is it doesn't want to have any possible actor in the region that can help impose the consensus that it's been trying to undermine. It wants the right to basically crush Palestinian self-determination. And because Iran has supported resistance factions like Hamas, that's why it has to go, because it stands in the way of Israel being able to steal as much land as it wants. And Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, he recently gave an interview where he acknowledged that Hamas's demands are simply that they wanted Israel, on top of releasing political prisoners, to withdraw from the occupied territories, including the West Bank. And therefore, Hamas, along with Israeli captives inside Gaza, had to be destroyed. This is Yoav Gallant.
I'm fighting Hamas since it was established in 87, and I know them quite good. And I knew that they will not give you anything unless you have something that they really need. And this is not the prisoners. The prisoners in Israel...
Meaning the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons.
The Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons was already given. They were speaking about Israel withdrawing from Judah and Samaria. They were speaking about how to divide Jerusalem in their thinking. So
Judea and Samaria, that means the West Bank. So Hamas was speaking about Israel withdrawing from Judea and Samaria, which is Israel's term for its settler colonies in the West Bank, and also how to divide Jerusalem, which is giving East Jerusalem to Palestinians, which again, that's supposed to be the compromise that most of the world supports and the U.S. once claimed to support. But Israel won't even accept a Palestinian compromise because they want to hold on to that land in the occupied West Bank. And so Yoav Gallant is saying there that that's what Hamas's motive was in launching October 7th. It wasn't just getting prisoners, political prisoners freed. It was also getting Israel to end its occupation. Israel won't do that. And so therefore, we have to be in this perpetual war with everybody.
Well, it's also ascribing logical motives to what Hamas did when we were told it was just about sheer savagery, killing Jews and strangling babies.
Yeah.
Now they tell us. There's a major spread in the Financial Times from last weekend, I believe, about Netanyahu's next move. An emboldened Netanyahu makes its next move. And Ami Ayalon, who is the former director of the Shin Bet, says that by late spring 2024, the war on Gaza had achieved all military objectives possible. There's nothing else it could achieve, and that everything that has happened since then has been purely political. In other words, all the slaughter that we're continuing to witness is political because Netanyahu will lose his coalition, may go to prison for corruption trials, and needs to keep the war going for as long as possible. And now the Trump administration, following the lead of Tony Blinken and Biden, are assisting. But Ayalon, in his assessment, said Biden was a Zionist. Biden actually had ideological motives. Trump does not. And Trump is being purely opportunistic there, which is interesting. It's just transactional politics. You have going back to the lobby documentary, the hidden camera documentary that Al Jazeera refused to publish. Adam Milstein, some of his staffers at Israel lobby groups like the Israel Project and elsewhere declared that they would get on the phone with Trump and his people, and Trump would say, "Send me more money. I need more money from Adam Milstein. What do you want me to do?" And it was just like that. It's all on camera. So there's an Israeli investigative report that emerged this week. I don't have the photo in front of me. There's no real point. Netanyahu deployed a photo of what he said was a tunnel in the Philadelphia corridor between Egypt and Gaza after achieving all military objectives in Gaza that they thought they needed to achieve by the spring. In order to keep Israel bogged down there, he said, we need to occupy the Philadelphia corridor. And here is a giant tunnel that we've just discovered that a Jeep can drive through. It turned out the Israeli military had built a trench around the Jeep out of dirt that resembled a tunnel, and there was no tunnel. It was completely imaginary, and it was front and center in Netanyahu's presentation, along with phony leaks disseminated through the German tabloid Bild and I believe Jewish Insider here in Washington from Netanyahu's team, claiming that Yahya Sinwar had a plan to escape into Egypt along with several hostages unless Israel occupied the Philadelphia corridor. And now they're demanding to occupy the Philadelphia corridor again. They're still doing it. It's still happening now, and so many people are being slaughtered. West Gaza is being heavily bombarded as we speak. I mean, just go follow any Twitter account from Gaza City, and you will see the torment that they're going through for this political war. Anything else we need to cover on Israel-Palestine?
Well, only that now, if you are in scientific medical research and you want a grant from the National Institutes for Health, sorry, if you support a boycott of Israel, you will not be getting any grant money to, I don't know, research cancer. If your school or institution happens to support a boycott of Israel. This is from Glenn Greenwald. Under new guidelines released by the National Institute of Health, any medical researchers will have all funds terminated if they support a boycott of Israel. They could support a boycott of any other country or even other U.S. states, just not Israel. And NIH, correct me if I'm wrong, is now under the direction of Jay Bhattacharya, who was a leading voice against censorship during the COVID era. But now, the Trump administration, now he's working on the Trump administration, where censorship is fine if it means cracking down on voices that are critical of Israel. And of course, Bobby Kennedy or RFK Jr., the head of HHS or whatever he's renamed it, he's an instrumental player in all of this, in making sure that health now in this country is synonymous with censoring criticism of Israel.
Well, it's extremely ironic. Jay Bhattacharya, I interviewed him about the Great Barrington Declaration. I thought they had it right. I think, they've been vindicated, along with Martin Kulldorff, who is aside from being a former Harvard epidemiologist who signed that declaration, a left-wing anti-war activist. It wasn't a right-wing declaration, but irrelevant. One of the things that inspired it, aside from the opposition to the lockdown policy, which has done so much damage, social damage, economic damage, was the censorship that these scientists and scientific experts and professionals were just sick of being shut down because they were challenging the Fauci-led consensus. And now you have the NIH. I just learned about this story before we went live, so I haven't had much time to process it. And I've never known Jay to be a big Zionist cheerleader for Israel.
Yeah, no. I mean, this clearly, there's no way that this was done at his direction or at his initiative. If anything, it comes from RFK Jr., who has talked openly about censoring criticism of Israel, and he obviously loves to profess his fidelity to the Israeli state. That's been an issue with him for a very long time. But he declared, Bobby Kennedy Jr. declared that anti-Semitism was a disease, a public health epidemic, as HHS director.
which is kind of like a woke thing to do.
It's super woke. It's super woke. This is like the ultimate DEI initiative, like forcing universities to basically worship Israel if they want funding. This is the behavior that they made fun of, and they had a lot of grounds to do it when it was being carried out by liberals. But now they're taking it to a new extreme. It's comical. The last time I saw Jay Bhattacharya, I saw him in person. It was at an event, honoring him, and the big theme of the night was that he had helped stand up to censorship, and I agreed with it that he had. But being part of an administration now that is now censoring people for criticizing Israel, they're making a mockery of everything that they supposedly stood for back when Biden was in power.
Complete mockery. I mean, the censorship is off the charts. Off the charts. I mean, it's an escalation of the censorship we saw during the Biden era. And the Biden era censorship was like squirrely. It was like, we're going to get Chris Krebs and all these disinformation experts and Nina Jankowicz to issue scary quotes into the Washington Post about Russian bots and right-wing populist bots and trolls. And then we're going to go issue directives quietly behind the scenes to Facebook and all the other tech lords. The Trump administration, I mean, they're openly doing it. They have this Neanderthal district attorney here in DC, Ed Martin, who has actually started issuing letters threatening academic publications, asking them if they have any balance, if they have balanced their perspectives on scientific issues with someone from the other side, referring to the conservative or MAGA side. So you actually have a government, federal, like U.S. attorneys writing academic journals to impose balance. And I mean, on a grander scale, look at what the Trump administration is doing to Harvard. It's basically demanding the right to vet department heads, to vet curriculum, and to prevent international students of certain political persuasions from even being on campus. Harvard has decided for now, I don't know if they're going to give in. Alan Garber's letter that he issued today, the Trump administration, was kind of mealy-mouthed. But so far, they're actually the first major elite institution standing up to this. But it's censorship that is off the charts. There's nothing I can compare it to except maybe the McCarthy era. And for the most part, liberals have just kind of bent over backwards to accommodate this, or scurried away, or like the premier academic expert on fascism, Jason Stanley, ran away to Canada, the bastion of anti-fascism, where they like honor Ukrainian Nazis in Parliament.
And what's her name? Deborah Lipstadt. Is that her name? Yeah. She's a historian who was Biden's envoy for supposed for combating supposed anti-Semitism. She said basically that she agrees with the Trump policy of censorship, but she just wishes it was done more deftly. That was her comment recently. So that's the pushback we're getting from establishing Democrats. And Cory Booker mentioned the censorship sort of in passing during his 25-hour marathon speech in Congress, obliquely referencing it, but not directly. Rachel Maddow recently showed footage of protests in support of Palestinian rights and against censorship, but again, she didn't mention Palestine or Gaza or any of the reasons why all these students are being kidnapped off the streets and deported. So that's the state right now of the Democratic resistance on this pivotal censorship issue.
I think Deborah Lipstadt kind of let the cat out of the bag, that they do want this to get done. They don't want these students agitating for Palestine on campus. They don't want Palestine to be on the table. They're afraid of it. They loathe it, but they just don't want to antagonize elite institutions and start defunding them and threatening their own people. Because, I mean, who runs the endowment of these institutions? Like Harvard's endowment is run by Penny Pritzker, who is one of the two major pro-Israel families that catapulted Barack Obama suddenly to power. So they can't just go after their own like that. So it's kind of like, and you know, they're worried about the rule of law and order, but it really speaks to the Democrats' messaging. The Democrats' messaging is all focused on one guy who's a Salvadoran named Kilmar Abrego, who was accused by Trump of being an MS-13 member and sent to the CCOT torture prison dungeon in El Salvador. And the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0 that he should come back because it has not been well established that he was an MS-13 member. He's married to a U.S. citizen. He has U.S.-born children. He was a union member. He was working in the U.S. He wasn't accused of any crimes, but he does have some tattoos that are kind of on the line. And the Trump administration is trying to allege that they're MS-13 tattoos. He's not coming back. It is a constitutional crisis to reject the Supreme Court order, 9-0. But you hear nothing about someone like Mahmoud Khalil, like nothing from them about this. They've made this guy like their poster boy, Kilmar Abrego. And Mahmoud Khalil, he's clean. He's as clean as it gets. He's in a dungeon in Louisiana in the United States simply for negotiating on behalf of the Columbia students. He was at SICE, which is an Imperial training network. He worked for the British Foreign Ministry. He worked in the embassy for the Brits in Lebanon. I mean, there's nothing you can see. He was anything but a Hamas member or a militant. And he's, written this powerful Washington Post editorial where he even speaks about reading Viktor Frankl's book about the Holocaust. You can't accuse him of anti-Semitism, but the Democrats will say nothing about him. And this really says a lot about the Democrats. They do not want to touch this Palestine issue. And they don't just want it to go away. They want the issue to go away through repression. I think some of them are quietly cheering this on. What I can definitely say is we should not be bullied or intimidated or traumatized into suddenly supporting them again just because it's not the Trump world fascist machine.
Tough choices. Really, really tough choices.
Yeah, it's like lupus or cancer.
Yeah.
Very hopeless. So, do you want to talk Syria?
Yes. There was one thing I actually forgot to mention, which is Mike Huckabee basically bragging about starving Gaza. I missed that too. I forgot. I think we should play this clip.
Yeah.
For those
introduce it for us.
For those who missed it, this is the newly deployed U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, basically bragging about rejecting an appeal from the World Health Organization to put pressure on Israel to stop its full-blown siege of Gaza, where for many weeks now it's resumed its policy of blocking everything from getting into Gaza: food, water, medicine, everything. And this is Mike Huckabee taking the time to make a video basically bragging about being complicit in a war crime.
Who is the regional coordinator for the WHO for the Eastern Mediterranean region, called upon me to put more pressure on Israel to bring humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. I appreciate the message from Dr. Balke. And today, what I would like to suggest is that we work together on putting the pressure where it really belongs, on Hamas, to give us the opportunity to open up those humanitarian channels. So we call upon Hamas to sign an agreement so that humanitarian aid can flow into Gaza to the people who desperately need it. When that happens and hostages are released, which is an urgent matter for all of us, then we hope that that humanitarian aid will flow and flow freely, knowing that it will be done without Hamas being able to confiscate and abuse their own people by not allowing those resources to get to the people who desperately need it.
So he took the time to go and make a video basically broadcasting the fact that Israel is imposing a starvation siege, imposing collective punishment on the people of Gaza. Because whatever you think about Hamas, even if you blame them entirely for everything that's happened since October 7th, the people of Gaza have nothing to do with it. And it's illegal to use them as basically collateral, as hostages, to cut off all aid. Like, you just can't impose collective punishment. But he's bragging about the fact that he is. And even there, he's saying, even if all the hostages are released, then we hope we'll be able to resume the free flow of aid. And by the way, Hamas has agreed to a deal already. It's Israel that is holding it up. So even the premise of his support for collective punishment is wrong, on top of the fact that you just can't support collective punishment to begin with. But I just find it amazing that he took the trouble to broadcast his own willingness to be complicit in a starvation siege.
Well, that's part of the punishment porn that's become popular among part of Trump's base, that's being broadcast through the White House official Twitter account, the DHS account, ICE accounts. They're trying to thrill their base with the sadistic punishment of the poor, non-American terrorist mass that has been declared an enemy infestation. I mean, it's consistent with the messaging, and it's part of what the appeal of Trump is like, yeah, these people, it's about time. FAFO, that's all it is.
Yeah. For
Mike Huckabee, it's also consistent with his Christian Zionist ideology, which is the basis for his approach to Israel Palestine and the basis for his appointment. And the Christian Zionist, in their eschatological final solution, the Jews who are represented by Israel, this phony creation, which is as connected to the authentic history of the Bible as Gail King is to outer space travel, is the Jews need to be at war. The Jews need to be perpetually at war in order to fulfill the end times final solution for Mike Huckabee. And so the deal cannot be accepted. Mike Huckabee is going to align himself fully with Netanyahu and the most extreme elements in his coalition as an American to obstruct a ceasefire deal. And what has Hamas asked for? They've asked for all, just an end of the war in exchange for all the hostages. They've said that they will store their weapons. I don't know how they're going to do that, but they've offered to cede power to a unity government, to cede power, or to a technocratic government. They have offered to leave power. They do not want to rule Gaza. And Israel in turn says, well, we'll only accept a certain number of hostages for a 40-day ceasefire, which means after 40 days, they'll start the killing again. And how did they start the killing again when they broke this ceasefire? With one of the most ferocious assaults on the civilian population of Gaza, in which over 80 children were killed in less than 1 hour. So why would they accept that? Israel does not, Netanyahu specifically doesn't want to end this war. There are now elements like powerful figures in Israeli society that want to end the war. Netanyahu calls them the deep state, the gatekeepers. Dan Halutz, for example, former Israeli chief of staff and Air Force chief, has said Netanyahu needs to basically be like forcibly removed from power. And there are major protests in Tel Aviv in support of a deal, but can't have it with Netanyahu. And so Huckabee's just there to back him up.
And what did Israel just target in recent strikes? From what I've heard, they targeted rescue equipment that's used, like the few remaining stocks of rescue equipment of heavy machinery that's used to dig in the rubble. Well, in the latest round of Israeli strikes, I was told at least that was targeted and destroyed, so that people now trapped under rubble have even less of a chance of being rescued. I mean, already their chances were extremely slim because Gaza just doesn't have the infrastructure and the equipment to be able to rescue people. But some of the latest targeting, I was told, includes some of the few trucks and vehicles that can be used to rescue people.
Yeah, after a professional mistake led to the killing of 15 rescue workers. Should we move on here?
Yeah.
All right. So there's a lot of action around Syria, Washington and Syria. Washington's laid out its terms. The Trump administration's laid out its terms for Syria, and it sent quote unquote America First member of Congress Marlin Stutzman to Damascus to announce the terms. The terms are terms of U.S. withdrawal from northeastern Syria, where we learned there are 2,000 U.S. troops. We thought there were 1,000, but there are 2,000. Trump wants to withdraw them, but only on certain terms. They won't basically want normalization with Israel. They're not going to allow the Syrian foreign minister a visa unless he agrees, at least provisionally, a visa to the U.S. And at the top of the list of terms, which was reported by the Washington Post, but it's just sort of easier to kind of view through Twitter, is that the Syrian government ban all Palestinian factions and then deport them to Israel. Actually, this is how the Washington Post reported it, not deport them to Israel, but deport their members. It could be to Jordan or somewhere like that, to ease Israeli security concerns. And already, as Richard Medhurst notes here, senior members of Palestinian Islamic Jihad have been arrested by Jolani's men. Under Assad, PIJ was headquartered in Damascus, and Jolani has spent the last months dismantling their presence, yet another concession to Israel and the U.S. at the expense of the Palestinians. This is what we said would always take place after regime change. Palestinian refugees have been granted, have been hosted in a much more generous way by the Syrian state than, for example, in Lebanon, where they're deprived of employment and treated like a foreign infestation. They're basically treated like equals. And now they are being stripped of their ability to defend themselves. And I think the next move is to strip them of refugee status completely in order to nullify the right of return as enshrined by UN Resolution 194. Meanwhile, another demand that's been conveyed by Representative Marlin Stutzman relates to Syria's chemical stockpiles. And we'll definitely want Aaron to weigh on this. And here, also Representative Corey Mills met with Ahmed al-Shara, aka Mohammed al-Jolani. And that's another MAGA member of Congress. These are the sanctions relief conditions, and they include complete destruction. So it's not just removing troops, it's sanctions relief. The Caesar sanctions are crushing the Syrian civilian population and starving Syria of cash. It's a crime against humanity. They were there just to accelerate regime change. Regime change took place. They're still there. Syria's complete destruction of any remaining chemical weapons stockpiles and full cooperation on counterterrorism efforts, which means basically like destroying Palestinian factions. So what's wrong with that? I mean, what's odd about that, Aaron?
Well, so going back to over a decade ago, Syria destroyed its chemical weapons stockpile in cooperation with the OPCW in a deal brokered by the U.S. and Russia. And they got rid of their chemical weapons stockpile. This was internationally monitored. The U.S. took possession of Syria's chemical weapons and destroyed it. And that deal was brokered by Russia to basically help Obama get out of his so-called red line, where he vowed to bomb Syria if chemical weapons were used. But then after a chemical weapons attack in Ghouta in August 2013, he was presented with evidence that actually it was not the Syrian government. And so he backed off. But the U.S. didn't want to admit that publicly, so Russia gave them an out by saying, okay, let's broker this deal. We'll get rid of Syria's chemical weapons stockpile, and this will take care of the issue. But the problem that this posed for dirty warriors who wanted to overthrow the Syrian government was that they needed these chemical weapons allegations to justify continuing the dirty war. And they've used those chemical weapons allegations since. There have been other chemical weapons deceptions, like in Duma in 2018. But now Assad's gone. So what do you do? How do you resolve the fact that you've accused Assad of repeatedly using chemical weapons, but now he's not there anymore, and they haven't found any chemical weapons because it looks very much like he actually did destroy his whole stockpile. So what I think this demand is basically they want Syria's help to help basically, I don't know,
cook up,
yeah, create more fraud, create another deception, just as previous allegations against the Assad government were deceptions. We know that Ghouta was, based on all the available evidence. We know that Duma was in April 2018, based on all the available evidence, including the OPCW leaks, where whistleblowers challenged the cover-up of their own investigation. So that's what I think this request ultimately comes down to, is help us basically make it look as if you have chemical weapon stockpiles. Because listen, if Syria really still had chemical weapon stockpiles, it's been, 4 months now since Assad has been ousted? And where are they? How come they haven't found a trace of it? And there's no remote effort to even pretend so far that there is an actual stockpile. There was some article in the New York Times recently said, which said that the stockpiles might be hidden in caves. Like, what are you talking about? How are you going to hide sarin or chlorine or whatever it is, and all the precursors and all the production materials in caves? It's ridiculous. And Syria's appointed in its new government somebody who headed the White Helmets, Raed Saleh, who headed the White Helmets, and the White Helmets were involved in staging the Duma incident. So that's what I think Saleh's portfolio will include, is helping to basically come up with some way to make it look as if they finally found and gotten rid of Syria's chemical weapons stockpile, when really it isn't there. And to push this narrative, they're coming up with some really ridiculous claims and just some outright lies. So there was just recently an article in the New York Times talking about Ghouta, right? Which, again, there was actually a chemical attack in Ghouta. Sarin was used. People were killed. But the problem is, Obama's own officials went to him, including James Clapper, and said the case against Assad is not a slam dunk. And that was a deliberate reference to the Iraq WMD hoax. And that's because all the evidence actually pointed to this being a false flag carried out by insurgents. And so now, in a bid to shore up the original narrative that Assad did it, the Times comes out with this long article about Ghouta, and they include this ridiculous claim about what happened. And it's based on a supposed witness who's a Syrian military defector who actually wasn't even in Syria by the time Ghouta was carried out. But the Times doesn't even really see a problem with that. But anyway, he claims that the August 2013 Ghouta attack was carried out from the Shariat Air Base. Okay. Where's the Shariat Air Base? It's in Homs, which is about 150 kilometers away from Ghouta. It's like, ask anybody. It's impossible. There's no way you can fire a sarin rocket, the kinds that were used in Ghouta, from 150 kilometers away, to the point where when the Obama administration back in 2013 initially said that Ghouta was carried out from a different Syrian military position of about 8 or 9 kilometers away, that was shown to be way too far. And the Times actually had to admit that. The Times had to admit back in 2013 that actually the range of the rockets in Syria had to have been about 3 kilometers. And this was based on work done by Ted Postel of MIT and a colleague of his, which showed very convincingly that given the, just the physics here, the payload of the rocket and how long it could travel carrying a certain weight of sarin, the range had to be about 3 kilometers, which, by the way, was the range in which insurgent controlled territory was. So now the Times, because they're so sloppy and just so sloppy in pushing these lies, they've expanded the range from 3 kilometers to 150 kilometers. It's such a joke. And the Times yet hasn't corrected it, even after I pointed it out. But this, like, even the people who will argue now that Assad did 2013, there's no way they're going to argue it was carried out from 150 kilometers away. It's just absolutely impossible. But this propaganda has gotten so sloppy that people forget how to even keep their lies straight. So that's why this just got printed in the Times. It's just such an unbelievable joke.
And the whistleblower, what's his name? Al-Zahar?
Oh, the purported witness?
Purported witness.
Yeah.
I mean, this dude came out and defected in 2013 and was making inconsistent statements at the time then, claiming that Assad had the power to destroy all 4 major population centers in Syria. That's how much sarin he had. It all came out around a very momentous time, I think ahead of the Ghouta attacks.
Yep.
When he defected, and now they're dusting him off. Like, why are they bringing him out now? This is like CIA Time Life classics, like sweating to the oldies. Like, what is he doing now? He has nothing new to offer, and they're making it seem like the New York Times has unearthed new evidence. It seems like they're just trying to justify the whole regime change operation.
Yep.
And I remember, it could correct me if I'm wrong, seeing video of him defecting around Khan al-Assal.
That's correct. And that's where Syrian forces were attacked with chemical weapons by the insurgents.
Yes.
Yes.
So if you want to know who's an expert on sarin and possibly sarin production and sarin deployment, why not look in the presidential palace stolen by Mohammed al-Jolani, aka Ahmed al-Shara, because it was his al-Nusra, local al-Qaeda branch, that Carla Della Ponte of the OPCW accused of possessing sarin in 2013 and using it against the Syrian government, which is why inspectors from the OPCW flew into Damascus in 2013. And I believe that the opposition panicked, and just a few miles away from where those inspectors were staying in their hotel, suddenly a sarin attack is declared in East Ghouta, which is like right outside Damascus, controlled exclusively by Jaish al-Islam. And the launchers came from inside East Ghouta. So all the ingredients are there.
Let's hear from Carla Del Ponte, former UN weapons.
And they removed her after this to like, get her out of there.
Yeah, this is, I believe, the clip.
We collect some witness testimony that that made to appear that some chemical weapons were used, in particular nervine gas, and what appeared on to our investigation that that was used by the opponents, by the rebels.
There you go. Yeah. And you know how hard it is for someone at that level to admit that, and why basically you didn't hear from her much after that? Because you just can't. These people are all under a lot of pressure, as we saw from the OPCW cover up in Duma. There's a lot of pressure put on everyone to toe the line. And there's actually a new book out by Ian Henderson, who's one of the OPCW whistleblowers, talking about how much pressure they were under and how basically they were told to come up with something to shore up the narrative. So that's a very rare admission in public from a UN official, but all of them say the same thing privately. That was just a rare admission in public. But we're supposed to forget about all of that. And but in the process, the problem like with a cover up is people get sloppy. And the lies become harder to sustain. So now the Times has come out and printed just one of the dumbest lies I've ever seen on this topic. And that's saying a lot because there's been so much fraud. But to claim that a sarin rocket was fired from 150 kilometers away and killed all these people, it's physically impossible. But yet that's what the Times is going with now because they just can't keep track of all the deceptions.
And the leader responsible for firing sarin, accused by the head of the OPCW before she was removed, is in the presidential palace now and is hosting all kinds of Western leaders and members of Congress from the US. And no one remembers that. And what you don't also hear any pressure about is the mass slaughter of Alawites, genocidal slaughter of thousands and thousands of Alawites on the Syrian coast under al-Shara, aka Jolani's watch, by the foreign elements, mainly the fanatics he's allowed in, and including fanatics he's put in the defense ministry from other places, Uyghurs, Tunisians, Uzbeks, and so on. No pressure is being put on him there. Not really. If anything, it's about Christians. And one of the most horrific crimes against women collectively in the region is unfolding inside Syria, in which women from minority sects are being kidnapped and basically trafficked into a form of sexual slavery, sabaya, by the fanatics in Idlib. And dozens of women, young women, are missing, but everyone's afraid to talk about it in Western media. The same thing that happened with the Yazidi women under ISIS. I mean, this is basically an ISIS or repurposed ISIS government. One of the few people with any prominence in the US who's talking about this phenomenon is Professor Josh Landis, referring to young kidnapped Alawite women in Syria. Hiba Ezzeddine, a Sunni woman from Idlib, explains that while visiting Idlib recently, she saw a girl who looked different and who didn't know how to wear a hijab. Hiba investigated and found out that the girl came from the coast where the massacres had taken place, indicating that she was an Alawite. The Idlibi man brought her from the coast and married her. Hiba asked her friends, rebels, militiamen, human rights workers, and rebels about kidnapping women from the coast. Unfortunately, many of them confirmed that this has been happening by numerous militias. I just spoke to Mother Agnes from the who is a nun from the monastery of St. James in Lebanon, who has been in Syria, who has been to the Alawite coast, delivering aid through a convoy, actually coordinating with the central Syrian government, and its aid arranged by the Kurds in northeast Syria. And she's working on a second convoy. I'll have the interview up this week at the Grayzone. And she told me that, this is much more widespread than we even understand. And yet you're not seeing Clarissa Ward parachute into Syria to investigate this. I mean, you would think that some feminist reporter with the resources would actually go into Syria and start asking questions about this. I put up a list that's going around of 48, 49 women who have disappeared since Jolani, aka Ahmed al-Sharaa, took power. And most of them are Alawite women. And many of them are teens. Several of them have been confirmed murdered. Some of them have been kidnapped with their younger brothers and siblings. And where are they? Where are these women? And where are the feminists to raise questions about this? Bring back our girls. Where is that? Well, I assume it's going to get worse because there's very little accountability here. And we just have 7 women abducted in the past 10 days that are listed here. So it's important to highlight this horrendous phenomenon because it fits a pattern that we saw in areas where ISIS took control. And now they control the 4 major Syrian population centers as they allow Israel to encroach without firing a single bullet. Sorry for the black pill. I want to cover one more thing before we go, unless there's anything you want to add on Syria.
No, just that these sectarian atrocities are exactly why some people didn't support the CIA and Israel and Gulf states and Turkey spending tens of billions of dollars arming a sectarian insurgency, exactly to prevent outcomes like this. And it's just unfortunate the people who supported all that don't care about the results of what they helped bring about or what they cheered on. Everyone just kind of moved on from Syria as if it doesn't matter anymore, as if all Syria's problems are gone away because Assad fled. And it's hard to get people to care if they just simply refuse to, and the issue is not being covered except occasionally. It's a real challenge.
Yeah, I saw some think tank sell out, I think named Reem Rifai. They didn't tag me, but they said Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate and Roger Waters now should hang your heads in shame now that Syria has been liberated because you've been proven wrong. How have I been proven wrong? Everything that I warned about and that so many others warned about is taking place, and even worse. I actually, might not have even imagined that the massacre of Alawites would be this bad. But I warned that Syria would be transformed into some version of Afghanistan, and the minority sects would all have to leave or be slaughtered, and that's happening. Along
And
with
this
other
soon too,
crimes.
like this soon, like it's been, like the massacres were in March, basically, right? So it took 3 months for like these mass killings to happen.
Well, they were happening during the dirty war. It's just Russia came in and stopped them, along with Iran.
Yep.
So they basically postponed what the West and the Gulf states and the backers of Takfiri forces wanted. And now we have it. So unfortunately, and I mean it, unfortunately, I'm vindicated. Why should I hang my head in shame?
People would say that there were sectarian massacres being committed by the pro-Assad side during the war, by Hezbollah. And I haven't looked at every single incident. Certainly there was sectarian rhetoric, but the problem with that argument is most of the Syrian army fighting the Sunni insurgents was Sunni itself. So you can't really say that like the period of the war that like the pro-government side was committing sectarian massacres when the majority of its army was Sunni, fighting alongside Shia militias like Hezbollah.
Who's arguing that Syrians didn't experience repression under Assad? This should have been an issue for Syrians. But now you have Uyghurs in the defense ministry in Syria. You have video of Uyghurs ripping down pictures of Assad. Why do Uyghurs get to choose the Syrian government? Why do people from Uzbekistan get to come in and slaughter Syrian minorities? Why does a guy from Chechnya get to check people's ID cards on the street corner? Why does Turkey and its director of intelligence, Ibrahim Kalin, get to march into Damascus and control the entire government while Israel takes over the south? I mean, this should have been an issue for Syrians, and it could have been resolved through an internal process. But it all started with the Axis of Evil declaration and the U.S. moving to target the Syrian government and mobilizing a coalition of some of the most undemocratic countries on the planet to destroy Syria because it was independent. So everything we've been saying has been coming to pass, and then it's unfortunate. It would have been great if we saw Ahmed al-Sharaa prove all of us wrong, but it's not happening.
Yeah.
So I wanted to cover before we close the nexus that's emerging between the Trump administration and certain comprador governments in Latin America, specifically El Salvador, but there's also Ecuador, where Daniel Noboa of the zillionaire elite Noboa clan has just apparently stolen an election in which Luisa Gonzalez, the social democratic candidate from Rafael Correa's party, appeared to have won, but it was surging in all polls just hours before the election. It's statistically impossible, according to Francisco Rodriguez, Latin American political scientist from the University of Denver, who's done an analysis, and maybe we'll interview him about that, or at the very least I'll tweet about it after the show. But Daniel Noboa's family, they have bonita bananas. Bonita banana shipments have been stuffed with cocaine and caught transferring into the U.S. Ecuador has become a major transit point for cocaine to the U.S., and it's been overrun with violence since Noboa took power. And Eric Prince and the Trump world security goons are painting Noboa as a kind of model, an economic model for Latin America. And at the same time, Prince and others, Trump himself, are painting Nayib Bukele, the Salvadoran president, who's very popular in El Salvador. We cannot deny that. Far more popular than Noboa, as their security model, how they want to order society. Well, what is Noboa going to do? He's hollowing out all social services, which is actually driving more young men into gangs, where the only source of cash is, and then to put them all in mass trials and lock them up in a giant prison and cash in on them. Cash in, as Nayib Bukele is now doing in El Salvador, where he has pledged to expand their CCOT prison, which has housed tens of thousands, maybe 40,000 MS-13 members, as well as other men who have been accused of being in gangs without anything approaching the judicial process that normally takes place. They've been jailed through mass trials, and it's led to a reduction in crime. I can talk about some other reasons, but it's made Bukele popular. Now it looks pretty obvious that what's taking place down there is entering a new stage. The new stage is that, and it raises questions about why CCOT was established in the first place. The Trump administration is seeking a gang declaration in Haiti, and with Bukele's cooperation, making plans to expand CCOT to 80,000 beds and move Haitian gang members there. And they're moving Venezuelans into CCOT who came to the US legally through the TPS policy. They're not illegal immigrants or undocumented per se. They were basically lured here after we destroyed their economy. 90% of those who have been deported to CCOT have no criminal record whatsoever. Only 6 have even been accused of felonies. All have been accused by Trump of being members of Tren de Aragua, and intelligence officials are leaking to the press, which is causing another intrigue inside the Trump administration, that they don't believe Tren de Aragua is really active in the United States or that it is connected in any way to the Venezuelan government. Tulsi Gabbard has come out and declared, oh no, that's not true, and they're the ones manipulating intelligence. And here she is basically making the case for regime change in Venezuela in order to support the deportation policy of Trump, which is sending as many to Bukele as possible. What is Bukele getting? Well, he's the president of a poor country, one of the poorest in the Western Hemisphere, which has basically survived off remittances since the Civil War, sponsored by the US, helped destroy their society. Can go into detail about that another time. He's getting $20,000 per head. So this is a source of cash. He's become one of the world's largest for-profit jailers. And it's led to this beautiful friendship with Donald Trump, where Trump influencers are actually going down to El Salvador. This is Nick Shirley, someone who's in the White House briefing room. He's one of the Trump influencers who gets like access to the Oval Office to produce like slavery porn. This isn't even CCOT, by the way.
This is a prison here inside of El Salvador, and each and every single person you see right now in this video are prisoners. And they made this factory so that way they can now use this factory to create new clothes, one for the prisoners, for the schools, for the government themselves, the hospitals, anything they need, they can now use it and make it here inside of El Salvador versus having to go get it from a country like the United States or China, helping create a more self-sufficient El Salvador. And each and every single day that a prisoner is working here inside of this factory, they then get 2 days taken away from their sentence. So imagine you have 10 years on your sentence, and by working in here, you can get your sentence reduced all the way down to 5 years. Technically, if you work for 5 years inside of this prison, you are then going to get your time cut in half every single day you work inside of one of the systems they have here set in El Salvador. It is actually pretty amazing. And what price would you personally pay on 2 extra days of your life?
Pretty amazing. A slave camp is pretty amazing. Also, the math doesn't add up, but what he said is that it's made El Salvador into one of the safest and most prosperous countries in the world. El Salvador is not one of the most prosperous countries in the world, and producing cheap textiles, I highly doubt they're all for domestic production and they're not for export. That wouldn't add up either. This is not CCOT. These aren't guys who have gang tattoos who are hardcore MS-13 operatives. Many of these are minor offenders who got long sentences, and they've just been turned into free labor for Bukele, and the MAGA world thinks this is awesome. This is their model. for the United States. I mean, Eric Prince has come out and said it. And Aaron, feel free to jump in, but now a major row, I guess as the British would call it, has erupted between Bukele and Venezuela that I think illustrates the geopolitical direction of Trump's deportation policy and the real role of Bukele in Trump's regional policy. And it's a letter from Nayib Bukele to Nicolas Maduro. We'll just hit the translate function so everyone who speaks English can, I mean, presumably you speak English, can read it as well.
And you want to zoom in if you can, so the text is a little bigger.
I cannot. Oh, well, here we go.
Yeah.
All right. So unlike our detainees, many of whom he's referring to, all the Venezuelans we have in custody were detained as part of an operation against gangs like the Tren de Aragua in the United States. False. You have like, there's like one known LGBT activist who has been detained. There have been numerous figures who've been detained who are confirmed to not be part of the gang, along with the fact that the vast majority of them were not even accused of any crime. Unlike our detainees, and this is just referring to the Venezuelans, many of whom have committed murder, your political prisoners have committed no crime. The only reason they are imprisoned is because they opposed you and your electoral fraud. So I want to propose a humanitarian agreement that includes the repatriation of 100% of the 252 Venezuelans in exchange for the release and delivery of an identical number of the thousands of political prisoners that you hold. And then those who are mentioned are family members and figures associated with Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez, who are the U.S. State Department, U.S. intelligence-run opposition figures who have inflamed the entire crisis in Venezuela by pushing sanctions, color revolutions, and regime change and coups, participated in coups, and who actually oppose Maduro's attempt to repatriate the Venezuelan migrants who are being held in this torture camp in a country they've never been. So what he's doing right here, Bukele is doing, is admitting that the Venezuelans are basically hostages and that they are being held as collateral. But collateral for who? Collateral for who? Collateral for his masters in Washington. Because that letter that he read right there, it looks like it was crafted by Marco Rubio's State Department. Those are Rubio demands. He's demanding an exchange of Venezuelans for figures that have been run by the U.S., who are U.S. assets. And remember when Bukele met with Donald Trump in the White House, he was asked, why can't you bring back, Kilmar Abrego? The Supreme Court has ordered it. Why don't you let him out? And he said, I have no power. I can't let him out. How do you want me to let him out? And he's basically saying, Donald Trump tells me who to let out and who to let in, and I'm just getting a bunch of money. So that says it all right there. And now there is a new geopolitical dimension, which is focused entirely on pushing regime change in Venezuela. And behind this all is Marco Rubio, who's, become close friends with Bukele. This is not just about, cleaning up our streets here in the U.S. And the mass deportations aren't even happening. It's just, smashy by ICE agents, smash and grab by ICE agents here and there. Wake up, because the policy is actually going to encourage more mass migration from Venezuela by destroying their economy, keeping them in a state of perpetual sanctions. And maybe they want that.
Well, yeah, that's been their policy in the first term. When they launched the coup, they knew that trying to destroy Venezuela's economy would cause migration. Trump was explicitly told that he went ahead with it anyway, and they're continuing that policy. I know there are some people in the Trump camp who want to give up on the Venezuela regime change campaign, mainly because they want access to Venezuela's energy. But it looks like Marco Rubio, his policy is winning out so far, because Trump, if he wanted to, could talk to Maduro. He's floated it before, but he didn't seem very interested in that. And he seems interested instead on creating more migrants and also keeping the cost of energy high, because if the U.S. accessed Venezuela's energy, the cost will go down. But the U.S. wants to cut itself off from that just so it could have the opportunity to continue regime change.
Definitely. And someone said, CCOT houses some very dangerous people. What do you do with them? Well, that's not the issue anymore. I don't think anyone is going to meddle in Salvadoran politics the way that Bukele has meddled in American politics, openly flouting court orders by the U.S. There was a court order by a federal court to bring the Venezuelans back to the U.S. for processing. They could have been deported to Venezuela. It's about the use of CCOT as a foreign black site by the Trump administration, taking the policy that emerged under George W. Bush, having black sites in Poland or black sites in Guantanamo Bay. It is a civil liberties issue, and it's a geopolitical issue. It's an issue of empire, using CCOT as an imperial weapon, using it now as an avenue for U.S. intervention in Haiti. That's the issue here. And Bukele has achieved his value to one political mafia in Washington by humiliating the other political mafia and the Democrats, and by serving as a loyal for-profit jailer and comprador regime that Trump can trust. That's what he's seeking. And it really highlights Trump's role at this point. This is where late capitalism is going. Just the mass jailing of the poor, repression, stripping us of our free speech rights, and enabling, as we see with other Trump allies like Javier Milei in Argentina, the multinational corporations behind these colorful, seemingly hilarious or magnetic cartoon figures who sit in the president's chair, enabling them to strip what's left of these dwindling resources. That's what this is about. That's ultimately what the war in Iran will be about. So it's important to wake up to what's really happening here and look past the culture war, the superficial culture war debate on immigration. Someone said, I feel it's ayahuasca time. I don't know what I'm going to do after this live stream. It's getting dark out here. I don't know. Kratom? Ketamine? Am I going to be like Elon Musk walking around on ketamine? I don't know.
Well, thankfully, you'll have an encounter soon, it sounds like, with a spiritual guru, Rabbi Shmuley. So maybe you could pose some of your quandaries to him. Maybe he'll have some advice when you're done debating whether or not Palestinians have the right to live, which he doesn't agree with.
I was just watching a clip of Dr. Oz, who was installed into the Trump administration. Like every carnival barker from Oprah who isn't a liberal is now in the Trump administration or around it. But he was on the Breakfast Club authorizing dating your second cousin. So
okay.
That's the medical advice. Shmuley's got the spiritual advice.
Yeah, Dr. Oz also recently said that the uninsured don't have the right to health.
They don't have the right to health care. Oh, no, they don't have the right to health. You're right.
Yeah.
So they should get 15-minute checkups in what did he say, in like a festival-like atmosphere?
Yes, that's exactly what he said. That's exactly what he said. Yeah.
And Mark Levin has gotten a position in like DHS or something, or a national security position.
Mark Levin, like the Fox News host? No.
Yeah, no, like the right wing, the radio jock, neocon radio jock.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Ben Shapiro is lighting the torch at Israel's Independence Day celebration coming up.
Well, that's very appropriate. That's very, very appropriate.
Yeah.
They couldn't have picked someone more fitting for that job. Yeah.
Do you think we would have gotten any of that if like Bernie was in power? I don't think so.
It's hard to think of Bernie right now. At least Bernie's getting out there right now. He's mobilizing people. He's keeping people. He's drawing big crowds. I'm not sure what else he's doing, but he did try to block arms transfers to Israel recently, and that was something actually I have to credit him for. And I did notice that Rand Paul, despite him being like the anti-war guy on the MAGA side, Rand Paul didn't even vote for that one because I guess if you're in the MAGA camp, you just can't vote against Israel. Seems like only Thomas Massey is willing to do that. But anyway, it's a sad state of affairs all around.
It is. And, beware of Bernie and AOC's tour. They're galvanizing a lot of real grassroots energy, incredible scenes of people in Idaho exploding anytime Bernie mentions suspending arms sales to Israel, which he calls Netanyahu. He can't say Israel. He says Netanyahu as if he's just some bad apple. But beware, because they're just going to sheepdog everyone back into the Democratic Party and get everyone signed up to mailing lists. And then they'll be mobilized to vote for Gavin Newsom and Josh Shapiro in 2028. And based on Josh Shapiro comparing himself to the Hebrews who came out of Egypt after his mansion was attacked by an obviously mentally disturbed individual on Passover, it's pretty obvious to me that he's running. The attack was weird. And then they immediately blame it on Palestine. He's running. But beware. I mean, the sheepdogging continues and there's real grassroots energy and there's nowhere else for it to go. It's because of the way our system is constructed, which is tragic. Elections we're not in election season now. That's a relief. It's a relief to not be in election season. We have to just process the first months of the Trump administration without a campaign, without the consultants, without the polls. And it's a test of everyone's integrity and their principles, especially people who called out the Biden administration's free speech violations from the right or civil liberties violations from the right. And we see them all showing how inconsistent they are. But this period is a test of everyone's integrity, principles, and those principles will be put to the test when the Democrats ask everyone who supports the liberation of Palestine to vote for them again, because they're not Trump. And Trump is just so fascist and so horrible and wants to empty Gaza. And a test of integrity and principles will be to withhold your vote unless the Democrats make real material pledges to challenge and sever the special relationship with Israel. And, that didn't happen during the 2024 campaign. What was it? Undeclared or uncommitted? Uncommitted dropped the ball and they never made any real demands. They dropped the ball and they failed. And so there needs to be a real uncommitted movement. I think if Bernie and AOC can, they will not support a real uncommitted movement, but if one can organize through the grassroots inertia, that could be something. And we're seeing support for it in our culture. At Coachella, Israel lobbyists freaking out about an Irish band with a massive display. F Israel, free Palestine. That is the cry of a generation that has witnessed this genocide in real time and is sick of the lies. They're sick of the killing. They're sick of the manipulation. They're sick of being called anti-Semites. And that's just how they feel. And you can't stop that. And it's borne out in the Pew poll, showing a vast, vast majority of progressive young people under 45 and a slight majority of Republicans under 45 see Israel negatively. So how will they stop this wave? The only way they'll stop it is by scaring them and sheepdogging them into the Democratic Party without a demand. That's all I have to say for today.
All right, that's a great place to wrap. Thanks everybody for joining us. Support the Grayzone at the links on your screen. Thank you, Max. That was great.
Thanks for being here, and we'll see you all next week. And hopefully, big things coming here at the Grayzone in the next few weeks. But and we'll see how the Shmuley debate goes. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining us. Subscribe. We're so suppressed on YouTube, so subscribe and like this stream. I my own account where we live stream this from on Twitter X, on Elon's Twitter X, is more shadow banned than ever. I'm sorry, Elon, that I couldn't have your child. I just didn't feel like you're going to be a father to the child, and they need to be in a 2-parent home. So I guess I got shadow banned. Yeah, support us however you can, however you choose, and we'll see y'all next week. Peace.
Peace.